All right, y'all, we're going to be talking today just really quick about the brain organization, its protection, and as well as its blood supply and how important it really is. So first off, let's go ahead and discuss some directional nomenclature of the brain. You're going to notice as we go along, if you're reading some of the case studies, if you're reading things about the brain, the directions aren't quite the same. Throughout this presentation, we use the directional stuff that you're familiar with, but as you get out into the real world, there will be some nomenclature that we do need to hit up, and let's go ahead and hit that up now. Now, the nomenclature is based off of the brain of the four-legged animals, for instance, this dog. Now, usually we'd refer to the top of the brain as a superior, this is inferior, this is frontal, this is dorsal. A little bit different because it's based on this dogo. Now, the very top part is called the dorsal, because if you look at the top part of this dog's brain, it's actually referencing to its back. If you look at the front part, this is called rostral, which means face, which kind of makes sense. That's where our face is as well as this dogo's face, this adorable little Shiba Inu. Now, the belly is ventral, or this bottom part is ventral, which refers to its belly. And the back part is called caudal, which means tail, because that's where the dogo's tail is. Principal parts of a brain that you will see in humans is you have a cerebrum, the thinky parts. You got your diencephalon, which has a lot to do with homeostasis, relay station, we'll talk about that later. Followed by the cerebellum, which has your fine motor movement and control of your motor movement and coordination thereof, as well as your brain stem, which is your vital portion. We'll talk about that here in a little while. But all of this is protected by a few things. One, the cranial bones. You got the nice, hard, strong bones, followed by your cranial meninges and the cerebrospinal fluid. We talked a little bit about these meninges when we talked about the spinal cord, but we're going to go ahead and hit these up again real quick. You got three layers. You got the dura mater, which means tough mother. That's because it literally is tough. This layer right here that you're seeing is holding its shape. Notice that it's holding its shape. It's made of a very strong, dense fibrous connective tissue. It does afford some protection, but it also has one tiny difference that you're going to see between the spinal cord dura mater and the cranial dura mater is that it has two layers. Now, a principal reason why it has that two layers is that it helps form this right here, a sinus. The sinus is where a lot of that blood that comes in from that arachnoid mater, or those lower level maters, come in, innervate into this, release that blood into here, and this blood is eventually returned back into your system's circulatory system, back to the heart, lungs, etc. There are some indentations to help that go in between the hemispheres, that go in between your cerebellum. That's just to help set up and get rid of that extra blood, also that extra protection. Now, something to help you remember and do a little bit of application. You have an epidural hematoma and a subdural hematoma. An epidural usually refers to some type of bleeding that's happening above, which epi means above. Whether it be some type of issue with the bone being broken or there's a leak up above it, and it's pushing that dura mater down onto that cerebrum. Now, subdural hematoma usually is some type of capillary or venous issue going underneath, sub meaning underneath the dura mater, the subdural hematoma, and it's pressing directly down onto that pia mater and onto that cerebrum, which is a very bad thing, especially if it's a very fast fill. It can cause some serious damage. It can be a lack of nutrients, and it could kill you off depending on what gets hit. What is the damage? Let's go ahead and progress down into the next layer of mater. This is the arachnoid mater. If it's translated directly, it just means the spider mother. Yeah, if you look at that nice and close, you see it looks like a spot. This brain's been exposed out into the wild blue yonder. It has all that fibrous stuff. It looks like a spider has made its home on that brain. It's the layer in between the pia and the dura mater. It's where the circulation of your cerebral spinal fluid, as well as you're going to find all your arteries and veins there. The innermost layer, called the pia mater, this guy right here, is actually just a thin layer of epithelial cells, whereas the arachnoid mater is made of a loose connective tissue. This is a literal epithelial tissue. Very thin. It's called, the direct translation of it means gentle mother. So you need blood. Your brain needs tons of nutrients. It needs its oxygen, it needs its glucose, those primary two things, in order to survive. In fact, it accounts for about 20% of the oxygen supply it takes up in the brain, even though it weighs just a few pounds compared to your other 100 or so pounds. It's taking up all that oxygen because it has a lot going on. If there is an interruption in that oxygen supply more than 3 minutes, you're going to see permanent damage or even brain death or death of the cells themselves. Another essential nutrient, the glucose. That glucose is the primary and almost only nutrient that can give that blood the brain that it needs the energy that it needs in order to survive. It doesn't need insulin in order to take up glucose. If you are a soul that is having fun with diabetes mellitus type 1, type 2, or what have you, you have to be watching and are dependent upon insulin. A lot of you can contest that you have to be careful with your insulin injections. If you overdose and you get a glucose deficiency, you're going to be confused, you're going to be dizzy, you're going to have convulsions, or may even go unconscious, which is a very bad thing. Quickest remedy is to eat something pure in sugar. We actually had somebody a couple of months ago come into the ER, in which they're driving down Highway 11 coming from New Orleans into Slidell. And they're driving erratically. They're going on left and right. They're running into the sides. They're scraping it up pretty good. And the policeman had thought that he was drunk. So they pulled him over. He had a car accident with those side rails, so they pulled him into the ER. And it turns out that his blood glucose was actually just really, really low. So what we did is we gave him some sugar per oral. We gave him an intravenous injection of that sugar. We gave him that solution of saline that has a mixture of glucose to help raise it up. And he got back and he got better and he became more well aware. He wasn't drunk, he just had a deprivation of sugar. Now, if there is another type of interruption in the blood, whether it be a stroke or one of these two different types of strokes, will cause some serious issues as well. An ischemic stroke is a blockage, and a hemorrhagic stroke is when you get the vessel is damaged and blood is leaking out. And because of that blood is leaking out, it's damaging or it's swelling up different brain tissue. And because that blood's not making it to the other parts of the brain, that other part of that brain is not getting the nutrients it needs. Now, so ischemic, blockage, hemorrhagic, a leak of blood. There is a couple of different types of ischemic stroke. There's one called a transient ischemic stroke. That is when a blockage comes along, blocks it for just a second, and it gets cleared out. That is not I feel better, I should ignore that, la 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 moment. That is a, maybe I should go talk to the doctor now type of situation. Because if you ignore that, then you are more than likely going to have a full-on ischemic stroke where you will lose a very large portion of your brain and you will be a very unhappy fellow or woman. One thing to recognize to help you realize how hemorrhagic stroke is a little bit not very good for your brain is that you have a blood-brain barrier. There are certain nutrients that it does. You do not want not nutrients, certain components, certain elements, certain signaling molecules you do not want getting into your brain. Hence, you have a blood-brain barrier. And if you're going back to the cells of the body, remember, or the brain, you'll remember that there's these little astrocytes that help create this blood-brain barrier. Problem is, a lot of therapeutic medicines can't cross that blood-brain barrier. So antibodies, things like that, if you got some type of pathogen in your cerebral spinal fluid or hanging out with your brain, some of those antibiotics aren't going to get across and stop that growth. Again, you don't want any type of injury to the brain, and you don't want to break down that blood-brain barrier, the passage of blood. It's going to irritate your brain tissue and cause some serious issues. Now, how do we get those nutrients to that brain? There's something, as well as give it that support, it's called the cerebral spinal fluid. It's a fluid that is extracted from your blood and then put into circulation. It goes into circulation in these different ventricles, these 4 ventricles. It's the lateral ventricles, the 3rd ventricle, and the 4th ventricle. Now, some of you are asking, wait, there's a 3rd ventricle and there's a 4th ventricle. Where's the 1st and 2nd? Well, the 1st and 2nd are just these lateral ventricles here. Let's go ahead and do a little transverse cut through the brain real quick and take a look at those lateral ventricles. That's just your 1st and 2nd ventricle, etc., etc. You got these guys right here called choroid plexus. You'll find them in all your ventricles. They are the places that you have these ependymal cells. If you remember what these ependymal cells do, they create that cerebral spinal fluid. So inside these choroid plexi, you're going to have that cerebral spinal fluid being leaked out into these ventricles, down into the 3rd and down into the 4th, etc., etc. Now these are produced, they push along these liquids, and it's sort of like a little bit of a bayou thing going on, creeping down that canal, that central canal down your spine, back up around, and back into the arachnoid mater where it gets reabsorbed back into those sinuses and that blood, and it returns back to that heart. Here is a frontal cross section for you. You'll see that there's that choroid plexus, there's the lateral ventricles, 3rd ventricle, an aqueduct of the midbrain, 4th ventricle, and etc. You'll notice that there are some areas that are very thin and very short that can get blocked off, and that's no good, whether it be a congenital issue or something is just broken off. If it's a congenital issue, you'll see, and it's a baby. This one's a 3-month-old baby that's called hydrocephalus. That cerebral spinal fluid is building up and up and up, and there's no place for it to go. So fortunately for this kid, those bones, those cranial bones, aren't fused yet, and it's allowing that liquid to escape. And it gives it that alien appearance. But in an adult, if there's some type of issue where there's no shunting, something is blocked, you'll see these lateral ventricles that are this is a normal picture of those ventricles, those lateral ventricles. But here, those ventricles are extremely expanded. You'll see migraines, you'll see confusion eventually, you'll see loss of consciousness and brain damage if this is not taken care of. There's a couple of ways you can take care of it. You could take diuretics, depending upon the severity of the case. I'm not the doctor, obviously. I can't tell you about your specific type of thing. You might, if it's weak enough, you can take diuretics. But more often than not, if it's a really bad situation, it's completely blocked off, they're going to go ahead and put in a shunt. The shunt is a tubing that they stick underneath your skin, and that one end has it stuck into your ventricle. And then that liquid is either drained back into your blood near your heart, or the easier thing to do is just let that cerebral spinal fluid leak into your cavity, your abdominal cavity, where it's absorbed back up and gets recirculated back into your blood. With that, that is the end of this particular clip. I'm going to go ahead and see you in the next one.